The year was 1923, early June, when the morning sun painted the Arizona sky in shades of gold and amber. On the porch of Broken Creek Ranch, an old man sat in his rocking chair, white hair catching the light like fresh snow. Samuel Brennan, 85 years old, wrapped in a wool blanket despite the warmth, watched his grandson Jacob approach with that curious look young boys get when they're about to ask something important. Jacob was 12, all gangly limbs and earnest eyes, the kind of boy who listened when old men talked. He settled onto the porch step, close enough to hear, but far enough to give his grandfather space. "Grandpa," the boy said, voice careful, "at school they say you had two wives, two Apache wives. Is that true?" Sam's weathered face creased into a smile, the kind that held both joy and sorrow in equal measure. "Two grandmothers you never got to meet, boy. Two of the finest women who ever drew breath on this earth." Jacob leaned forward, eyes wide. "But how? How did you meet them?" The old man's gaze drifted toward the horizon, toward mountains that held memories like graves hold bones. "It was October of 1883. I was 45 years old. And son, I'd been dead inside for 8 long years." His voice dropped lower, taking on the quality of distant thunder. "Sit yourself down proper now. I'm going to tell you about the day I spent my last dollar buying 2 women at a slave market and how they saved me from a darkness deeper than any grave." The old man closed his eyes, and when he opened them again, they held the weight of decades past. "Let me take you back to when I was just Sam, just a cowboy who'd forgotten how to live." The screen of memory shifted, colors bleeding from the present into the past, until 1923 faded away, and 1883 rose up like smoke from an old fire. The dawn of that October morning broke cold over the grasslands of the Bighorn Ranch, 8 miles west of Copper Springs. The sun hadn't yet cleared the Mogollon Mountains, but Sam Brennan was already in the saddle, had been for 2 hours, watching over 200 head of Hereford cattle as they grazed across 5 miles of open range. He sat astride Smoke, his American quarter horse, a 15-year-old gray gelding that knew cattle work better than most men. The horse moved beneath him with the easy rhythm of long familiarity, responding to the lightest pressure of Sam's knees, the smallest shift of his weight. No words needed. After 8 years together, they spoke a language deeper than speech. Sam's Stetson, brown and battered from 15 years of sun and rain, shaded eyes that had long ago lost their spark. His flannel shirt, blue and brown checks faded to ghost colors, was already dark with sweat despite the morning chill. The leather duster coat hung open, revealing the twin Colt Peacemakers holstered at his hips and the Winchester rifle secured to his saddle. The spurs on his Justin boots jingled softly with each movement, a lonesome sound in the vast emptiness. A bull calf, young and stupid with youth, suddenly bolted from the main herd, heading straight for the mesquite thicket where wolves and mountain lions waited for foolish creatures. Sam didn't hesitate. His right knee pressed gently against Smoke's side, and the horse wheeled left with the precision of a dancer, closing the distance in smooth, powerful strides. Sam's hand moved to the lasso coiled at his saddle, 30 feet of braided rawhide that had been his companion through countless cattle drives. His fingers knew the rope like a blind man knows his cane. He formed the loop 6 feet across, testing the weight and balance. Then he began to spin it overhead, once, twice, 3 times, building momentum with each rotation. The rope sang through the air, a whistle only cowboys knew. The throw was perfect. 35 feet through morning mist, the loop sailed true and dropped over the calf's head with the gentleness of a mother's hand. Sam pulled, not hard, just firm enough. The calf stopped, confused but unhurt. Smoke backed up automatically, keeping the rope taut, while Sam dismounted and approached the frightened animal. "Easy now," he murmured, running his hand along the calf's neck. "Ain't nothing out there but death, son. Stay with your mama." He removed the rope with care, coiled it back onto his saddle, and watched the calf trot back to the herd, already forgetting its brush with freedom. "Brennan!" The voice came from behind. Mr. Horn, owner of the Bighorn Ranch, rode up on a chestnut mare, applause in his eyes if not on his hands. 35 feet in dead center, Horn said, shaking his head. "I've been watching cowboys for 30 years, Sam. Ain't never seen better than you. Stay the winter. I'll pay $35 a month. That's 5 more than any hand on this ranch. Sam didn't look at him, just kept his eyes on the horizon where the sun was finally breaking free of the mountains. Appreciate it, Mr. Horn, but I'm only good till month's end, then I need to move on. Horn's face softened with something close to pity. 8 years, Sam. 8 years you've been drifting. Catherine and Lily wouldn't want you living like a ghost. The names hit Sam like fists. Catherine, Lily, words that tasted like ash in his mouth. Maybe not, Sam said quietly, but they ain't here to tell me different. Horn sighed, recognizing the wall he had hit so many times before. Take the day off then. Tomorrow we start moving the herd to winter pasture. Here's your week's pay. He handed over $7 silver and 50 cents in smaller coins. Sam took the money, feeling its weight, knowing it represented 4 days of hard labor under a sun that gave no mercy. Need to ride into Copper Springs, Sam said. Salt and flour running low. Go on then. Be back tomorrow at dawn. Sam touched his hat brim in acknowledgement and turned Smoke toward the east, toward a town he visited once a month for supplies and nothing more. 18 miles through country that would kill a careless man without breaking a sweat. As he rode, memory came unbidden, the way it always did when he was alone. The year 1875 rose up like a specter, 9 years ago, but fresh as yesterday's wound. He'd been 37 then, leading a cattle drive 100 miles north, 4 days away from home. It was good money, money Catherine needed for their little ranch, money that would secure their future. He'd kissed his wife goodbye, ruffled his daughter's blonde hair, promised to bring back candy and a new doll. Don't be long, Daddy, Lily had said, 7 years old and bright as morning. Mama says you're always late. Not this time, little bird, he'd promised. Not this time. But on the fourth night, sleeping under stars beside a dying fire, he'd woken with a start, his chest tight, breath coming hard. Something was wrong. Every instinct he possessed screamed danger. He'd saddled his horse and ridden through the darkness, 40 miles without stopping, Smoke's hooves eating the distance like years eat life. Dawn revealed the truth, smoke and ash. Blackened timbers, the smell of burnt wood, and something worse, something that would haunt him until his dying breath. He'd run into the ruins, screaming their names. A beam had fallen across his path, pinning him beneath its weight. And in those terrible moments, trapped and helpless, he'd heard it. Lily's voice, faint and failing. Daddy, help me, it's so hot. Daddy, please. And Catherine Icona, singing through her fear and pain, singing her daughter to sleep one last time. Hush, little baby, don't you cry. Mama's gonna sing you a lullaby. Then silence. The silence that followed him everywhere, that filled his ears at night, that made sleep a battlefield and waking a curse. Neighbors had pulled him from the wreckage. The fire had taken everything. Catherine and Lily were gone, their bodies too damaged by flame to even lay out proper. They'd buried what remained in simple coffins, and Sam had stood at their graves without tears, because something inside him had burned away too. 8 years. 8 years of drifting from ranch to ranch, town to town, always moving, never settling. 8 years of working until exhaustion claimed him, drinking until memory blurred, existing but not living. A ghost in cowboy boots. Sam shook his head, trying to clear the past like a man shakes off water. Copper Springs lay ahead, a small cluster of wooden buildings huddled together against the vastness of the territory. 300 souls, more or less, depending on the season and the price of silver. He guided Smoke down the main street, past the saloon where men drank away their failures, past the general store owned by Chen Wei, a Chinese immigrant who'd survived building the railroad and stayed to build something gentler. Sam had planned to tie up at Chen's hitching post, buy his supplies, and leave before dark. But then he heard it, the sound of chains rattling, the murmur of a crowd, the crack of a whip against wood. His hands tightened on the reins. Smoke felt the tension and stopped without being asked. In the town square, a wooden platform stood 4 feet high, and on that platform stood 2 women in chains. Around them, 60 or 70 men pressed close, their faces showing curiosity, contempt, and in some cases, hunger. Sam should have turned away, should have ridden past. Should have bought his salt and flour and disappeared back into the anonymity of the range. But he didn't. Because one of the women looked up, and her eyes met his. And in that instant, Sam saw his daughter Lily looking at him through flames, begging him to save her. He couldn't breathe, couldn't move, couldn't do anything but stare at those eyes that held the same desperate plea he'd failed to answer 8 years ago. The town square was packed, bodies pressed close in that peculiar way crowds have when they're watching something shameful but it can't look away. Above the mass of hats and heads, a wooden platform rose like a stage, and on that stage stood a man in a black vest and white shirt, hair slicked back with pomade, holding a leather whip in one hand and a bill of sale in the other. Ezra Crowley. Everyone in 3 counties knew the name. Indian trader, they called him, though the more honest term would have been slaver. The sign behind him proclaimed in neat letters, Indian Labor Exchange, legal indentured servitude under Arizona Territorial Law 1882. Licensed by territory government. Legal. That word did a lot of heavy lifting. On the platform beside Crowley, 2 Apache women stood in iron shackles, the kind that left rust stains and scars. The chains connected their wrists to a central post, giving them just enough movement to stand, but not enough to run. Not that running would have helped. Not here, not now. The older woman stood tall despite everything. Naughty, Crowley had called her. Maybe 27, 28 years old. She was taller than most women, nearly 5'9", with shoulders broad as a working man's. Her traditional Apache tunic, deerskin with blue and red beadwork, hung in tatters, revealing a back crisscrossed with whip scars, some fresh enough that dried blood still darkened the fabric. Her hair, black as midnight, was matted with dust and blood, but her eyes blazed with a hatred so pure it seemed to burn the air. She wasn't broken. Not yet. Maybe not ever. The younger woman knelt beside her sister, small and trembling. Yuma, 22 years old but looking younger in her fear. Her buckskin dress was torn and filthy, her face streaked with tears and dirt. The shackles had rubbed her wrists raw, and blood trickled down her hands to drip onto the wooden platform. But even in her terror, she stayed close to her sister, one hand gripping Nady's leg as if it were the only solid thing in a world gone mad. Crowley cracked the whip against the platform, the sound sharp as a gunshot. "Gentlemen, gentlemen, if I may have your attention." His voice was cultured, educated, the voice of a man who'd read books and considered himself civilized. That somehow made it worse. Before you stand 2 prime specimens of the Chiricahua Apache Nation, captured just 3 weeks ago near Sierra Blanca. Healthy, strong, suitable for any manner of labor you might require. He walked behind Nady, running the whip handle across her shoulders like a merchant displaying goods. The elder, Nady, is strong as any man. She can chop wood, work fields, tend livestock. 12 hours a day, no complaints, already broken to work. Nady's jaw clenched, but she didn't move, didn't give him the satisfaction. The younger Yuma knows cooking, sewing, cleaning, docile, obedient, not yet spoiled. The way he said it made Sam's skin crawl. Several men in the crowd laughed, and Sam saw the knowing looks they exchanged. He'd seen those looks before, in army camps and frontier towns, and they always meant the same thing. "Now then," Crowley continued, his showman's smile never wavering, "opening bid for the pair is $50. But gentlemen, I'm feeling generous today. Buy both, and I'll take $5 off. A bargain you won't find elsewhere." A fat farmer near the front raised his hand. 55. Need help with the corn harvest. A saloon owner called out from the back. 60. The big one can serve drinks, a small one can wash dishes. A miner with silver dust still in his beard. 65. Got 20 men need feeding. The bids came fast, casual, like they were haggling over horses or cattle. Some people in the crowd turned away, shame touching their faces but not enough to make them speak up. Others laughed and made crude jokes about what uses 2 Apache women might be put to. Behind the platform, Sam caught sight of Bulldog Pike, Crowley's enforcer. A big man, 260 pounds of mean, with red hair and a face covered in acne scars. He stood with his arms crossed, a sawed-off shotgun in easy reach, eyes crawling over the women with the kind of hunger that made Sam want to reach for his gun. Sam sat on smoke at the edge of the crowd, every instinct telling him to ride away. This wasn't his business. These weren't his people. He'd spent 8 years learning to mind his own affairs, to not get involved, to drift through life without making waves. But then Yuma looked up, just for a second. Just one moment when her eyes swept across the crowd, searching for something, anything that might resemble mercy, and she looked at Sam. Time stopped. The world narrowed to those eyes, brown and terrified and so achingly familiar that Sam's heart seized in his chest. Lily, those were Lily's eyes, his daughter's eyes, looking at him through smoke and flame, begging him to save her, to do something, to not let her die alone and afraid. He'd failed her, failed them both. Catherine and Lily had burned while he was 100 miles away, and he'd lived with that failure every single day since, a weight that grew heavier with each sunrise. The memory crashed over him like a wave. Lily's voice in the flames, "Daddy, help me, it's so hot. Daddy, please." And him trapped under a fallen beam, helpless, useless, unable to save the one person in the world who mattered most. Not again. The thought came clear and cold. Not again, not this time, not ever again. Sam's hands moved before his mind caught up. He dismounted smoke, boots hitting dirt, and pushed through the crowd. Men gave way, sensing something in his face, something dangerous. His voice cut through the bidding like a knife through fog. "How much for both?" The crowd went silent. Heads turned. Crowley looked down from his platform, eyes narrowing as he sized up this new bidder. "You and the Stetson. That's Sam Brennan, isn't it? The lonesome cowboy. You sure you can afford to keep 2 women fed and clothed, old-timer?" Sam didn't answer. He just climbed onto the platform, each step deliberate, and pulled out the leather pouch he kept in his coat pocket. He dumped its contents onto the small table beside Crowley. 3 $20 gold double eagles clattered down, bright as sunshine. 14 silver Morgan dollars, each one bearing Liberty's profile. A handful of smaller coins, quarters and dimes and nickels, counted out by feel. $80 total. Every cent Sam had saved over 8 years of cowboy work. Money he'd been saving for nothing in particular because nothing in particular mattered anymore. The crowd erupted in whispers. $80, that's more than a good horse. Old Sam's lost his mind. What's he planning to do with 2 Apache women? Crowley picked up one of the gold coins, bit it to test its authenticity, and smiled. "Well now, seems we have ourselves a serious buyer. $80 for the pair. Do I hear 85? Silence. Nobody was willing to outbid that much cash money. Going once, going twice. Crowley's gavel fell. Sold to Sam Brennan for $80. He reached for a set of keys on his belt, preparing to unlock the shackles and hand them to Sam along with the women, like they were livestock being transferred from one owner to another. But Sam didn't take the keys. Instead, he drew his Bowie knife from his boot, 12 inches of steel that caught the afternoon light. The crowd gasped. Crowley stumbled backward. Even Nady tensed, her warrior instincts screaming danger. Sam knelt in front of her, moving slowly, deliberately. Close enough that she could have kicked him, could have tried to fight even with bound hands. His eyes met hers for just a second, and in that second, something passed between them. Not trust, not yet, but maybe the beginning of something that might someday become trust. He slid the knife blade carefully into the lock mechanism of her wrist shackles. The metal was old, poorly made. One twist and the lock gave way with a click that sounded like freedom. The chains fell. Nady stood frozen, staring at her freed hands as if they belonged to someone else. Her wrists were raw and bleeding where the iron had rubbed flesh down to muscle, but she was loose. Sam moved to her ankle shackles. Click, click. More chains hitting the platform. Then he turned to Yuma. The younger woman flinched when he approached, expecting violence because violence was all she'd known for 3 years. But Sam's hands were gentle as he worked the knife into her locks. Click, click. Her chains fell too. Sam stood, sheathed his knife, and spoke to them in the handful of Apache words he'd learned during his cavalry days. Nijoni, Hijia. Good, let's go. His voice was rough from disuse, his pronunciation probably terrible, But the meaning came through. The crowd exploded into noise. He's freeing them. $80, and he's just letting them walk. The man's gone completely mad. Crowley's face flushed red. Mr. Brennan, those are your property now. Under territorial law, you have to keep them secured. You can't just let them run wild. Sam turned to face him, and something in the cowboy's eyes made Crowley take another step back. I didn't buy them, Sam said quietly. I freed them. There's a difference. He walked to the edge of the platform and looked at the two Apache women. You can come with me if you want, or you can go anywhere else. I'm not keeping you. I'm not owning you. You understand? Nady's eyes narrowed with suspicion. This had to be a trick. White men didn't free Apache women. White men took and broke and used until there was nothing left to use. But Sam just turned and walked away, down the platform steps, through the crowd that parted before him like water before a boat. He untied Smoke from the hitching post and climbed into the saddle. Only then did he look back at the two women, still standing on the platform in their rags and blood. Broken Creek Ranch, 18 miles west. If you want to come, you can follow. He turned Smoke and started riding, slow and easy, giving them time to decide. Behind him, Nady and Yuma looked at each other. 3 years of slavery had taught them not to trust anyone, especially not white men with kind words and sad eyes. But staying meant being sold again, meant more beatings, more hunger, more nights wondering if death might be kinder than tomorrow. Yuma whispered to her sister in Apache, "What do we do?" Nady looked at the cowboy riding away, then at Bulldog Pike, who was watching them with murder in his eyes, and Crowley, who was already calculating how to get his property back. "We follow," she said, "but keep a knife ready. If he tries anything, we kill him and run." They stepped down from the platform on bare, bleeding feet and began walking west. Behind them, Crowley turned to Bulldog and smiled. "Follow them, not too close. See where he takes them. In a week, we'll pay a visit. This time, we won't be paying for what's ours." Bulldog grinned, showing yellow teeth. "Gonna enjoy that visit, boss. Gonna enjoy it real good." At the edge of town, Chenwei stood in the doorway of his store, watching the scene unfold. He caught Sam's eye and nodded once, a gesture of respect between men who understood that sometimes the right thing and the legal thing weren't the same thing at all. Father Miguel Santos, the mission priest, made the sign of the cross and whispered a prayer in Spanish for the cowboy who just spent his last dollar buying freedom for two strangers. And Sam Brennan rode west with two Apache women following him on foot, walking toward an uncertain future in the gathering dusk. The sun was setting behind the Mogollon Mountains, painting the sky in shades of blood and fire, colors that reminded Sam of things he'd rather forget. He rode Smoke at a walking pace, slow enough that the two women following him on foot could keep up, fast enough that they'd make some distance before full dark. After 2 miles, he looked back. They were still following, but their pace had slowed. Nady walked with her back straight and head high, refusing to show weakness. But even from this distance, Sam could see her limping. Yuma barely kept pace at all, her smaller frame struggling with the rough ground and bare, torn feet. Sam reined Smoke to a stop and dismounted. When the women caught up, he could see the blood on the trail behind them. "Can't walk 18 miles on feet like that," he said. "You'll bleed out before we're halfway." Nady's hand moved to the obsidian knife she'd hidden in her tattered dress, ready to fight if this was the moment he revealed his true intentions. "We walk," she said in broken English. "We no need help." 18 miles, Sam repeated. "Full dark in 2 hours. Wolves and mountain lions hunt at night. You'll die out here." He walked to the back of his saddle and untied the lead rope for Copper, his spare horse, a 10-year-old sorrel mare with a gentle disposition. "You," he said, gesturing to Nady, "you take Smoke. He's strong, can carry your weight easy. You," he looked at Yuma, "you take Copper. She's fast and smooth, won't jar your bones." Yuma looked at her sister, confused. Nady's eyes narrowed. "What about you?" "I'll walk, used to it." It was such a simple statement, delivered with such matter-of-fact certainty that it hit harder than any grand gesture could have. Men didn't give up their horses to walk. Masters didn't put slaves above themselves. For the first time, doubt crept into Nady's certainty that this was all a cruel trick. "Why me, son?" she asked. Sam met her eyes, and for a moment she saw past the weathered face and hard lines to the grief that lived behind them. Because I couldn't save the people I loved, he said quietly. Maybe I can save somebody else. He helped Yuma onto Copper, gentle as he would have been with Lily. The younger woman flinched at his touch, expecting pain, but his hands were careful, adjusting the stirrups, showing her how to hold the reins. Nady mounted Smoke without help, her warrior training evident in how she moved despite her injuries. She sat the horse like she'd been born to it, back straight, thighs gripping the barrel, hands light on the reins. Sam noticed and smiled slightly. You ride good. Apache women learn young. Apache women learn everything, Nady said. How to fight, how to serve, how to kill. The last word was a warning. Sam nodded. Fair enough. He started walking, leading Smoke by the reins, setting a pace that 8 miles without exhausting anyone. The two women rode in silence, watching his every move, waiting for the trap to spring. It never did. After 5 miles, they came to Gila Creek, 50 feet of fast-moving water, running high with autumn rain. Sam stopped at the bank and used a long branch to test the depth. 4 feet into the middle. Horses can swim it, but you need to know how. He looked up at Nady. You ride well, but crossing water is different. Listen careful. First, keep the horse's head pointed upstream at 45 degrees. Current will push you downstream, so you'll angle up to go straight across. Second, loosen the reins when the horse starts swimming. Let her do the work. If you pull, you'll choke her. Third, lean forward, hug her neck. Lower center of gravity helps her swim. Fourth, if you fall off, let go of the reins. Don't try to hold on. The reins will drag you under and you'll drown. Just swim with the current. Get to shore downstream. Understand? Nady processed this information, recognizing real knowledge when she heard it. This wasn't a man trying to impress her. This was a man trying to keep her alive. She nodded. Good, follow me. Do what I do. Sam led Smoke into the water. The horse hesitated at the edge, then plunged in, strong legs churning. The current caught them immediately, trying to sweep them downstream, but Sam kept the horse's head angled upstream, and they cut across at a diagonal, reaching the far bank 30 feet below where they'd entered. Nady followed on Copper, doing exactly what Sam had instructed. The horse swam strongly, and though the current was fierce, they made it across safely. Yuma came last, terrified, clutching the horse's mane with both hands. She did everything wrong, pulled the reins too tight, sat too high, but Copper was gentle and patient and got her across despite her mistakes. On the far bank, dripping and cold, Sam looked at Nady with something approaching respect. You learned fast, got the makings of a cowgirl. It was the first time anyone had complimented her strength in 3 years. Every other man had either feared it or tried to beat it out of her. Nady's lips twitched. Not quite a smile, but close. They rode on as the sun dipped below the horizon and the temperature dropped fast. Sam checked the sky, reading the clouds with a lifetime's experience. Storm coming, he said. Snow, probably. 5, 6 inches. Temperature will drop to 20 degrees. Still got 5 miles to the ranch, but there's a canyon between here and there. Dangerous at night, cougars hunt through there. We need to stop, make camp. He found a place beneath an overhanging rock shelf, sheltered from wind on 3 sides. Then he did something that surprised both women. He didn't use matches. Instead, Sam took out a bow drill kit he kept in his saddlebags. A curved stick, a straight spindle, a flat board with a notch cut in it, and a bundle of dry grass and bark shavings. Matches cost 10 cents a box, he explained, seeing their curiosity. Got to save money where you can. Cowboys learned to make fire the old way. He wrapped the bowstring around the spindle and began sawing it back and forth, the spindle spinning rapidly against the board. Friction created heat. After 3 minutes of steady work, smoke began to rise. A tiny ember formed in the notch, glowing red. Sam carefully transferred the ember to his bundle of tinder, blew gently, and flame blossomed like a miracle. Within minutes, he had a proper fire going, mesquite wood burning hot and clean. He filled his battered tin pot with water from the creek and set it to boil. When it reached a rolling boil, he dumped in 3 handfuls of coarse ground coffee directly into the water, added a pinch of salt to cut the bitterness, and let it boil for 5 minutes. Then he removed it from the fire and let it sit for 2 minutes, allowing the grounds to settle. Cowboy coffee, he said, pouring the thick black liquid into 2 tin cups and handing them to the women. Ain't sweet, but it'll keep you warm and awake. Yuma sipped it and grimaced. It was bitter as medicine. Nady drank without complaint, recognizing it for what it was: fuel, warmth, survival. Sam opened a can of beans, cut up some bacon, and cooked them together in his cast iron pot over the fire. The smell was intoxicating after the women's long starvation. He gave them the pot and spoons, keeping nothing for himself except coffee. "You need it more than me," he said when Nady tried to refuse. They ate in silence while Sam sat across the fire, staring into the flames with eyes that saw things beyond this moment, this place. Finally, when the women had eaten their fill and the fire had burned down to coals, Sam began to sing. Quiet, almost to himself, a cowboy ballad his wife had loved. His voice was rough from disuse, but it carried the melody true. "From this valley they say you are going. We will miss your bright eyes and sweet smile. For they say you are taking the sunshine that has brightened our pathway a while." The sadness in his voice was profound, a grief so deep it had no bottom. When he finished, Yuma whispered, "That was beautiful." "My wife liked it," Sam said. "She's gone now." "Your daughter too?" Nady asked, thinking of the eyes he'd had when he looked at Yuma. Sam nodded, unable to speak. The silence that followed held the weight of all their losses. 3 people who'd each lost everything that mattered, sitting around a fire in the middle of nowhere, bound together by nothing but chance and desperation. Sam unrolled his bedroll, a thick wool blanket lined with canvas, and spread it near the fire for the women. "You two sleep here, warmest spot." He moved 10 feet away, laid his saddle on the ground for a pillow, and stretched out with his Winchester across his chest and his Stetson pulled low over his eyes. Nady watched him through narrowed eyes, waiting for him to come to them in the night, to finally reveal what he really wanted. But he never moved. Every 2 hours, he rose silently, added wood to the fire, checked that the women were warm, and returned to his own cold bed without ever looking at them the way other men had. Yuma fell asleep first, exhausted beyond measure. Nady stayed awake longer, one hand on her hidden knife, waiting. But sleep took her too, eventually. And for the first time in 3 years, neither woman dreamed of shackles. When dawn broke cold and bright, Sam was already awake, boiling more coffee, his breath visible in the freezing air. 5 more miles, he said when they stirred. "We'll be home by mid-morning." Home, such a strange word. Neither woman knew what it meant anymore. They rode the final stretch through country painted white with fresh snow. 3 inches had fallen during the night, covering the world in silence. At 9 in the morning, they crested a low rise and Sam pointed ahead. Broken Creek Ranch. It sat alone in a valley between 2 low hills, a single-story log cabin with a stone chimney, a barn, a corral, and a small vegetable garden gone to weeds. Everything looked neglected, as if the place had been slowly dying for years, which it had. 35 acres, Sam said quietly, 18 head of cattle, 2 horses, and now 5 souls. He said it like a prayer, or maybe a confession. They rode into the yard and Sam dismounted, his joints stiff from the night on cold ground. He helped Yuma down, then watched as Nady dismounted on her own, proud even in exhaustion. The cabin door wasn't locked. Sam pushed it open and stood back, letting them enter first. Inside, dust covered everything. Clearly, no woman had kept house here in years. The main room held a table, 2 chairs, a cast-iron stove, and shelves of books. On the mantel above the fireplace, one item stood clean and dust-free, a photograph in a wooden frame. A woman with light hair and blue eyes holding a little girl who looked just like her. Both were smiling. Nady understood immediately. This was why he'd saved them. This was the ghost he carried. Sam lit a fire in the stove, the flames catching quickly on dry kindling. The room began to warm. Then he opened a door off the main room, a small bedroom with a single bed covered in a quilt printed with flowers. A child's room. On the pillow sat a cloth doll, aged and faded. Sam stood in the doorway, his hand trembling on the doorframe. "This is your room," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. Blankets in the closet, clean water in the kitchen, food on the table. Nady looked around for the lock, the chains, the bars. "Where's the lock?" Sam seemed confused by the question. There isn't one. Why don't you lock us in? Sam was quiet for a long moment. Because you're not prisoners. You're not slaves. You're people. He turned to leave, then paused. The door's not locked. The windows aren't barred. Horses are in the barn. If you want to leave, leave. If you want to stay, stay. Your choice. He walked into his own room and closed the door softly behind him. In the small bedroom that had once belonged to a little girl named Lily, two Apache women stood in stunned silence. Yuma picked up the cloth doll, held it gently. This was his daughter's room, she whispered. I know, Nady said. He gave us his daughter's room. Nady couldn't answer. Something in her chest had gone tight. She tested the door. It really wasn't locked. Checked the window, no bars, looked for hidden restraints, chains, anything that would reveal this as the trap it had to be. Found nothing. We take turns sleeping, she told her sister. You first until 2 in the morning. I'll watch. If he tries anything, I'll kill him and we'll run. But even as she said it, her voice lacked conviction. In his own room, Sam sat on the edge of his bed, holding the photograph of Catherine and Lily, tears running down his weathered face. I'm sorry, he whispered to them. I'm so sorry I couldn't save you. But maybe I can save them. Outside, snow began to fall again, blanketing the ranch in white. And in the darkness beyond the property line, a big man on a horse watched the cabin windows, memorizing the layout, planning his return. Bulldog Pike smiled in the shadows and turned his horse back toward town. In 1 week, he'd be back. And next time, there'd be no money changing hands. Just taking what Crowley considered rightfully his. The first day was ending at Broken Creek Ranch. But the story, the real story, was only beginning. The first morning light came pale and hesitant through frost-covered windows, painting thin silver lines across the wooden floor of the small bedroom that had once belonged to a girl named Lily. Nady woke at 5 in the morning, the habit of a warrior ingrained so deep that sleep never fully claimed her, even in exhaustion. Her eyes opened instantly, fully alert, her hand moving reflexively to the obsidian knife she'd hidden beneath the pillow before finally allowing herself to rest. She rose silently from the small bed where she'd spent the night beside her sister, careful not to disturb Yuma, who slept curled beneath the flower print quilt like a child seeking shelter from nightmares that had haunted her for 3 years. The younger woman's face, in sleep, looked peaceful for the first time in longer than Nady could remember. The lines of fear and pain smoothed away by genuine rest in a place that felt, however impossibly safe. Nady moved to the window, her bare feet silent on the cold wooden boards, and looked out at the ranch that was supposed to be their new home, though she still couldn't quite believe that word applied to them, to two Apache women who'd been bought and sold like cattle. Through the window, she could see Sam already outside in the gray pre-dawn light, his breath forming clouds in the frigid air that spoke of temperatures well below freezing. He stood by the woodpile with an axe in his hands, facing a massive cottonwood log that looked to be maybe 18 inches across and 3 feet long. He positioned himself carefully, lifted the heavy axe above his head with both hands, and brought it down with all the strength of a man who'd spent decades doing hard labor under an unforgiving sun. The blade bit deep into the wood but didn't split it clean through. Sam stumbled slightly as the axe stuck, his back clearly paining him, and Nady saw him press his left hand to his lower spine, wincing in a way that spoke of old injuries and the accumulated wear of 45 years of hard living. He worked the axe free with effort, reset his stance, and lifted it again, slower this time, moving like a man feeling every one of his years. Something in Nady moved before conscious thought could stop it, some instinct that she didn't fully understand herself. She pulled on the tattered remains of her Apache tunic, wincing as the rough fabric scraped over the whip wounds on her back, and stepped outside into the bitter cold without bothering to find warmer clothing. Sam didn't hear her approach, focused as he was on the stubborn log and the pain in his back. He raised the axe a third time, and that's when Nady's hand, strong and calloused from years of hard work, closed over his weathered fingers on the handle. He startled violently, turning quickly with the reflexes of a man who'd survived dangerous situations by staying alert. His free hand moved instinctively toward the Colt Peacemaker holstered at his hip before recognition stopped him. Before he saw that it was Nady standing there in the early morning cold, her breath forming clouds that mingled with his own. "Let me," she said simply, her English still broken but clear enough. She took the axe from his hands before he could protest or refuse, feeling the weight of it, testing the balance with the practiced ease of someone who knew tools and weapons equally well. Behind the main woodpile, partially hidden by shadow, stood a larger tool, a Pulaski axe with a longer handle and significantly heavier head designed for splitting large logs. She walked over and picked it up like it weighed nothing at all, like it was a child's toy rather than a tool that most men struggled to wield effectively. Sam stepped back instinctively, watching with eyes that held surprise but notably no fear. Nady positioned herself in front of the stubborn cottonwood log, studying it for a moment with the focused attention of a warrior assessing an opponent. She could see the grain of the wood, could read where the natural weaknesses were, where the fibers would separate most easily. She adjusted her stance, feet planted wide for stability, raised the heavy Pulaski high above her head with both hands, and swung. The log exploded into two perfect halves with a crack that echoed across the silent ranch like a gunshot, the pieces flying apart and landing several feet away in the thin layer of snow that had fallen during the night. The split was clean and precise, testament to both her strength and her skill. Sam's eyes widened with genuine surprise and what looked like respect. "You're very strong," he said, his voice carrying admiration rather than the fear or anger that Nady had learned to expect from men who witnessed her physical power. "I killed 7 Comanche warriors when I was 18 years old," Nady said flatly, meeting his eyes with a direct gaze that dared him to doubt her. "One at a time, with only a knife. They came to raid our village. I stopped them." Most men in Nady's experience would have recoiled from such a statement, would have been threatened or frightened by a woman who spoke of killing with the same tone one might use to discuss the weather. But Sam just nodded slowly, that same respect deepening in his weathered face. "Then I'm mighty glad you're on my side," he said simply. "We need strength here. Winter's coming hard, and there's work that needs doing before the snow gets too deep." It was such a simple response, utterly free of fear or judgment, or that particular hunger some men got when they saw a strong woman. He spoke to her like an equal, like a partner, like someone whose skill and power were valuable rather than threatening. Nady felt something shift in her chest, a tiny crack forming in the thick wall she'd built around her heart over 3 years of slavery and degradation. It wasn't trust, not yet, because trust took time and proof, but it was perhaps the beginning of something that might eventually grow into trust. "I will split the wood," she said, gesturing to the substantial pile of unsplit logs. "You should rest your back. I can see it pains you." "I appreciate that," Sam said, and there was no shame in his voice at accepting help from a woman, no wounded masculine pride, just practical acknowledgement and a gratitude. "Back hasn't been right since a horse rolled on me about 10 years ago. Some days it's worse than others. Today's a worse day." He limped back toward the house with a slight hitch in his gait, and Nady set to work with the Pulaski, each powerful swing of the heavy axe cutting away a small piece of the darkness that had lived inside her for 3 years. Each split log a tiny act of reclamation of her own strength and agency. Inside the kitchen, Yuma had woken to an empty room in immediate panic. For one terrible moment, she thought that Nady had abandoned her, had left during the night to seek freedom alone. But then she heard the rhythmic thwack of the axe splitting wood outside, and she rushed to the window to see her sister working in the cold dawn light, free and strong. Relief flooded through Yuma like warm water washing away ice. When her breathing steadied, Yuma turned her attention to the kitchen. It was sparse and functional, clearly the domain of a bachelor who cooked only for survival rather than pleasure. A wood-burning stove dominated one wall, its iron surface cold to the touch. A few pots and pans hung from hooks driven into the wall. A simple wooden table stood in the center with 2 mismatched chairs. On the counter sat the supplies Sam had mentioned: cornbread that had gone slightly hard, strips of beef jerky that looked tough as leather, 3 withered apples, and a jar of honey that had crystallized into a thick amber mass. Bachelor food. Survival rations. The pantry of a man who'd forgotten how to care about nourishment beyond simple fuel. Yuma's hands moved automatically, muscle memory and skills learned at her grandmother's knee rising to the surface. She rekindled the fire in the stove, coaxing flames from cold ashes with dry kindling and patient breathing. She found a battered pot, filled it with water from the hand pump at the sink, and set it on the stove to heat. Then she ventured outside to the garden, even though it was overgrown and neglected. Her grandmother had taught her that useful plants were survivors, that they persisted even when cultivated gardens turned to wilderness. She was rewarded for her faith almost immediately. Wild onions pushed up through the weeds in one corner. A scraggly sage bush grew near the fence, its leaves still fragrant. What might be Mormon tea grew in a patch near the old herb garden. She gathered what she needed with careful hands, whispering a prayer of thanks to the plants for their sacrifice. The way her grandmother had taught her was proper. Back in the kitchen, she made soup, simple but nourishing, flavored with the herbs she'd gathered and thickened with cornbread crumbled into the broth. As it simmered on the stove, a smell began to fill the kitchen and drift through the house, the first scent of genuine home-cooked food these walls had known in 8 long years. Sam came in from checking on the cattle in their winter pen, stamping snow from his boots on the porch and hanging his hat on a peg by the door. He stopped dead when the smell hit him, one hand gripping the door frame as if he needed physical support, his weathered face going pale and then flushing with color as some powerful emotion overtook him. "You all right?" Yuma asked, startled by his reaction and worried that she'd done something wrong. Sam couldn't speak for a long moment. He couldn't explain to this young Apache woman that this smell, this simple soup made with wild herbs and care, was exactly what Catherine used to make on cold autumn mornings when he'd come in from checking the stock. That the scent carried him back across 8 years of loneliness and grief to a time when he'd been loved, when he'd had purpose beyond simple survival. When breakfast had meant family and warmth rather than just fuel to get through another empty day. He just nodded, not trusting his voice, and sat down heavily at the scarred wooden table, his hands trembling slightly as he folded them in front of him. Nadie came in a moment later, her face and hand red from the cold and the hard work. A substantial cord of firewood now stood neatly stacked by the door, enough to last a week or more even in the depths of winter. She'd worked for perhaps 2 hours, doing what would have taken Sam all day. The three of them sat together at the table in the kitchen's warmth. Yuma ladled soup into 3 chipped bowls that didn't match. Steam rose from the bowls in lazy spirals, carrying the scent of herbs and comfort. Sam lifted his spoon to his lips and tasted the soup. His eyes closed as he swallowed, and when he opened them again, they were bright with unshed tears that he blinked away quickly. "It's very good," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "Real good. Better than anything I've made for myself in longer than I can remember." "Thank you, Yuma. Truly." It was the first time he'd used her name like she was a person with an identity, not just property or a burden. The first time in 3 years that anyone had thanked her for cooking. She ducked her head, but Sam saw the small smile that touched her lips, saw the way her shoulders relaxed slightly, saw some of the fear that lived in her eyes recede just a fraction. They ate in silence, but it was a different kind of silence than the wary quiet of the previous night. Not the silence of strangers eyeing each other with suspicion, but the more comfortable silence of people too tired and hungry to waste energy on words. People who were beginning to find a rhythm together. When the bowls were empty, Sam cleared his throat and looked at both women. "My name is Samuel," he said formally. "Samuel Brennan, but everyone who knows me calls me Sam. I'd be pleased if you'd call me Sam." He paused, then the question came. "Why did you buy us?" Nadie asked directly, her English halting but her meaning crystal clear. She looked him straight in the eye, warrior to warrior, demanding truth. "I didn't buy you," Sam corrected gently but firmly. "I freed you. There's a difference, and it's an important one." "White men don't free Apache," Nadie said flatly, and her tone carried the weight of bitter experience. Sam was quiet for a long moment, his calloused hands wrapped around his coffee cup like he needed the warmth. "This white man failed to save the people he loved most in the entire world," he said finally, choosing his words with obvious care. "Failed completely and utterly when it mattered most. I don't want to fail like that again. I can't. I won't survive it." Yuma's soft voice came like morning mist. "The woman in the picture, your wife?" Sam nodded, unable to speak. "And the little girl?" "My daughter, Lily. She was 7 years old when she died." The past tense hung heavy in the air between them. "They died in a fire," Sam continued, the words clearly difficult but necessary. 8 years ago this past September. I was away from home, working a cattle drive 100 miles north. Came home to ashes and smoke. Heard them calling for me while I was trapped under a fallen beam. Heard them calling for me while I was trapped under a fallen beam. Couldn't move. Couldn't reach them. Couldn't do a damn thing except listen to them die. Couldn't do a damn thing except listen to them die. His voice broke on the last word, and he had to stop and gather himself. When I saw you on that platform in the town square, Yuma, when you looked up at the crowd with those searching for help that you knew probably wouldn't come, your eyes were just like hers, like Lily's, when the fire took her. I couldn't walk away. Not again. Not ever again. Understanding passed between the three of them then, a recognition of shared grief that transcended language and culture. Yuma had lost her grandmother to soldiers' bullets. Nady had lost her mother defending their village. Sam had lost his entire world to flames in his own helplessness. They were three people carved hollow by loss, sitting at a table in a house that grief had emptied of life. "If you want to leave when spring comes," Sam said, looking at both women with complete sincerity, "when the snow melts and the mountain passes are clear, I'll take you anywhere you want to go. Back to your people if there are people left. I won't keep anyone here against their will." "That's a promise." Nady and Yuma exchanged a long look, an entire conversation happening in silence the way it does between siblings who've survived hell together. "We don't want to go," Yuma said quietly but clearly. Nady nodded. "Our people are scattered, broken by war and disease. Taken to reservations where they're dying slowly, there is nothing left to go back to. Our village is ashes. Our family is dead or scattered. But here we are safe. Here we are warm. Here we are treated like human beings. And we have food," Yuma added softly. "Real food, and a bed without chains. And for the first time in 3 years, I feel like a person instead of a thing." Sam's throat tightened with emotion he couldn't quite name. He'd lived so long with the conviction that he had nothing to offer anyone, that he was just a ghost drifting through the world waiting to die. But maybe he'd been wrong about that. "Then you're welcome to stay as long as you like," he said, his voice thick with feeling. "Forever, if that's what you want. This house has been dead too long. Maybe it's time it had life in it again. Maybe it's time all three of us remembered what living feels like instead of just surviving." That afternoon, they worked together without planning it, without discussing roles or making formal agreements. It just happened, as natural as breathing, three people finding their rhythm like musicians learning to play together. The north fence had collapsed under the weight of heavy snow that had fallen a week earlier. 40 feet of posts and rails lying scattered across frozen ground. Sam went out to survey the damage, calculating what materials they'd need and how much labor it would take, and found Nady already there, lifting a 12-foot rail that should have required two strong men working together. She looked at him, and he could see in her eyes that she was waiting for the criticism or fear, or that strange anger some men exhibited when confronted with female strength. "Can you hold it steady while I nail it?" Sam asked instead, pulling nails from his pocket and hefting his hammer. Relief and something warmer flickered across Nady's face. "Yes." They worked in tandem for the rest of the afternoon, Sam's decades of experience with construction, meeting Nady's raw physical power and quick intelligence. She learned fast, understanding after one demonstration how the posts needed to be set, how the rails should be positioned for maximum strength, how to judge if something was level and true. Yuma brought them tools they needed, learning the English names as Sam used them. Hammer, nail, post, rail, level, saw. She repeated each word carefully, her quick mind storing them away, building vocabulary that would help her navigate this new world. The sun was setting by the time they finished, painting the snow orange and gold and deep purple. All three were exhausted, hands numb with cold despite the work. But the fence stood solid and true, 40 feet of new construction that would hold against winter storms and wandering cattle. "Good work," Sam said, and he meant it deeply. "That's as fine a fence as I've ever built. Better, actually, with 3 pairs of hands instead of just my old tired ones." Nady looked at the fence with something that might have been pride showing in her eyes. Nobody had let her build anything in 3 years. She'd only been allowed to destroy, to labor mindlessly, to suffer. This fence was different. This fence was hers, theirs, something they'd created together. It mattered. It would last. It was proof that she was more than what had been done to her. That night, after a supper of beans and salt pork that Yuma had somehow made palatable with wild herbs, they sat around the fireplace in the main room. The wind howled outside like a living thing, dropping the temperature to brutal levels. But the fire Sam had built kept the cold at bay. Sam sat in his worn leather chair, mending a saddle strap with leather cord in a curved awl. His hands moved with practiced efficiency, knowing leather intimately, how it behaved under stress, how to make a join that would hold. Nady sat on the braided rug near the fire, sharpening her Apache knife on a whetstone with long, practiced strokes that created a rhythmic whisper of steel on stone. The knife had been her mother's, one of the few possessions she'd managed to keep through 3 years of slavery, cherished as the last physical link to the woman who'd raised her to be a warrior. Yuma perched on the stone hearth, warm but not too warm, sewing a tear in Sam's heavy coat with tiny, precise stitches that were nearly invisible, the kind of skilled needlework her grandmother had taught her during long winter evenings in their village. Nobody spoke, but the silence was companionable now, comfortable. The house no longer felt like a tomb. It felt, tentatively, like it might someday feel like a home again. After a while, Nady began to hum. It was an Apache song, low and rhythmic, the kind women sang while working or walking or doing the thousand small tasks that filled their days. The melody was unfamiliar to Sam but beautiful in its simplicity. Yuma recognized the song and joined in, her voice higher and sweeter than her sister's deeper alto, the two voices blending in harmony that spoke of years of singing together, of shared childhood and shared sorrow. Sam listened, the sound washing over him like rain after drought. He'd forgotten what it was like to have music in his house, to hear women's voices raised in song rather than screams or the terrible silence of absence. The sound filled spaces inside him that had been empty so long, he'd forgotten they existed. When they finished, he spoke quietly. "That was beautiful, truly beautiful. Thank you for sharing it." "Our mother taught us that song," Yuma said softly, her eyes distant with memory. "Before the soldiers came, before everything changed. She sang it when she worked, when she cooked, when she tucked us into our blankets at night." "She was a warrior," Nady added, and there was fierce pride in her voice. "Child of the water," they called her. "She trained me to fight because she knew that Apache women needed to be as strong as Apache men to survive in a world that wanted to destroy us." "She sounds like she was a remarkable woman," Sam said sincerely. "She died protecting our village," Nady continued, her hands never stopping their work on the knife. "Took 3 bullets before she fell. Killed 2 soldiers who thought she was just a woman. Would have killed more, but she was making sure the children escaped first. She chose to die so others could live." Sam heard the grief beneath the pride, the wound that had never healed. He understood that kind of wound. He carried his own. "My wife was a teacher," he offered in return. "Came all the way from Philadelphia to teach at a school for orphans in Tucson. That's where we met. She saw me come into town all dusty and rough from 6 weeks on the trail, and she told me straight to my face that I needed to learn to read better if I wanted to amount to anything more than just another drifting cowboy." A small smile touched his lips at the memory. And the thing was, she was absolutely right. She taught me to read real books, not just wanted posters and bills of sale. Shakespeare, Dickens, poetry by men who'd been dead 100 years but whose words were still alive. Things I never thought a cowboy like me would care about or understand. "You miss her very much," Yuma said softly, recognizing in his voice the same kind of grief she carried. "Every single day," Sam admitted, his voice rough with honesty. "Every single day for 8 years. But it's been 8 years now, and the missing doesn't hurt quite as sharp as it used to. The pain is still there, always will be, but it's become something I can carry instead of something that crushes me flat." He looked at the 2 women, one fierce and one gentle, both broken by the world and somehow still intact where it mattered most. "Maybe that's what time does," he said thoughtfully. "Doesn't erase the pain or make you forget the people you lost. but it makes room for other things alongside the grief. Makes space for new people, new purposes, new reasons to keep getting up in the morning. Later that night, after Nady and Yuma had gone to their room, after the house had settled into the deep quiet of a winter night, Sam stood at his bedroom window watching snow fall in the moonlight. Behind him, the house made its usual settling noises, sounds that had been his only company for so long, they'd become a kind of conversation. But tonight he could hear soft voices from the other room, Nady and Yuma talking quietly in Apache, sisters sharing secrets, making plans, being alive in a way they hadn't been allowed to be for 3 years. For the first time in 8 years, Sam felt something that might, with time and care, grow into something resembling happiness. Not the uncomplicated joy he'd known with Catherine and Lily that was gone forever, but perhaps a different kind of contentment, quieter and more cautious, but real nonetheless. The next 2 weeks passed in a rhythm of work and weather that felt almost peaceful. Snow fell heavy and frequent, burying the ranch under white silence that muffled sound and made the world feel smaller, more contained, safer. The three of them settled into routines without discussing them, each finding their natural place in the strange household they were building together. Nady took over all the heavy work without being asked. She fed the 18 head of cattle twice a day, breaking thick ice on the water trough with an axe when it froze overnight, hauling massive bales of hay from the barn to the feeding area. Her strength was genuinely astonishing, her endurance seemingly limitless, her capacity for hard physical labor exceeding even what Sam had managed in his prime. Sam watched her work and understood that this was how she healed, how she reclaimed herself, through sweat and muscle and the satisfaction of tasks completed well, through proving to herself that slavery hadn't broken something essential inside her, hadn't destroyed her spirit or her fundamental sense of who she was. Yuma claimed the kitchen and the garden as her domain. She cooked meals that slowly filled out Sam's gaunt frame and brought healthy color back to Nady's cheeks. She cleaned the house not because anyone demanded it, but because she needed to create order from chaos, needed to take the sad bachelor dwelling and transform it into something that felt like a home. And she began planning the spring garden with focused attention, understanding that growing food was both practical necessity and spiritual practice. She sketched layouts in the dirt floor of the root cellar, determining what would grow well in this soil and climate. Sam taught them both the specific work of ranching. He showed Nady how to check a horse's hooves for stones and infection, how to tell if a cow was getting sick before symptoms became obvious, how to read weather patterns in the clouds and know when storms were coming hours before they arrived. He taught Yuma how to churn butter from cream, how to preserve vegetables and meat in the cold cellar for the long winter, how to bank a fire so it would burn slow and steady through the night without consuming too much wood. And slowly, carefully, they taught him things too. Nady showed him Apache tracking techniques far more sophisticated than anything he'd learned in the Army. How to read disturbed earth and broken twigs and bent grass to know what had passed and when. How to move silently through brush. How to become invisible through stillness. Yuma introduced him to medicinal herbs growing wild around the ranch, plants he'd walked past 1,000 times without recognizing their value. Plants that could reduce fever and ease pain and fight infection better than anything a white doctor could provide. She taught him which plants were dangerous and which were healing, how to prepare them properly, how to recognize them in different seasons. They were building something together, the three of them. Not a family yet, maybe, because family was a big word that carried weight and expectations and trust that took time to earn. But they were building the foundation on which a family might someday stand, the groundwork of mutual respect and shared purpose and genuine care. 3 weeks after Sam had brought them home, exactly 21 days after he'd spent his last $80 to buy their freedom, the fragile peace they'd built together shattered like ice under a hammer. It was late afternoon, the sun already slipping behind the western peaks and painting the snow-covered ranch in shades of orange and purple. Nady came running to the house, moving fast but controlled, her face tight with the focused tension of a warrior who'd spotted danger. "Someone has been here," she said without preamble. 2 horses, both carrying heavy riders. They stopped at the eastern rise where you can see the whole ranch. They stayed there for maybe 10 minutes watching. Then they left, going back toward the town. Sam's jaw clenched, muscle jumping beneath weathered skin. He'd known this moment would come eventually. Crowley wasn't the type to accept the loss of $80 in two valuable pieces of property gracefully. How long ago? Sam asked, his voice level and calm, but his mind already racing through possibilities. This morning, maybe 3 hours after sunrise. I found the tracks when I went to check on the cattle in the far pasture. The tracks were maybe 8 hours old then. They'll come back, Sam said with certainty, already moving toward the gun cabinet he kept locked in his bedroom, probably with more men this time. We need to be ready. We need to prepare for the worst. He unlocked the cabinet with a key he kept on a chain around his neck and began methodically checking weapons. The Winchester was clean and fully loaded, 15 rounds in the magazine. The two Colt Peacemakers were in good working condition, cylinders turning smoothly, each loaded with 6 rounds. He had an old Greener shotgun, a double-barrel 12-gauge, and he loaded it with buckshot. Nady watched him work for a moment, then went to the small room she shared with Yuma. She returned carrying items she'd somehow managed to keep hidden. The knife her mother had given her, 10 inches of steel with an intricately carved Apache handle, and a traditional Apache bow made of mulberry wood, shorter than the bows white men used but powerful within its range. You kept those through 3 years of slavery? Sam asked, genuinely surprised. Hidden in my clothes when I could, buried when I had to, recovered when I was moved, Nady said matter-of-factly. A warrior never willingly gives up her weapons. These are more than tools. They are part of who I am. Yuma appeared from the kitchen, carrying the smaller shotguns Sam had given her and her medicine bag assembled from garden herbs. If there is fight each running, she said quietly but with conviction, there will be wounds. I need to be ready to treat them. Sam looked at these two women, one fierce as a winter storm and one gentle as spring rain, both brave beyond any measure he'd ever encountered. We'll make our stand here, he said firmly. This is our home now, all three of us. We defend it together or we don't defend it at all. The attack came 2 days later, just before dawn when the world was caught in that gray space between night and morning. Sam was already awake, a lifetime of cowboy habits making him rise before the sun. He was pulling on his boots when he heard them. Horses, multiple horses, moving slowly, trying for stealth, but unable to completely silence the sound of hooves on frozen ground and the jingle of tack. He was dressed and armed in less than a minute, moving with the efficiency of a man who'd been in dangerous situations before. But when he emerged from his room, he found the women were already up and ready. How many? Sam asked quietly. Nady closed her eyes, tilting her head slightly, listening with intense focus. 5 horses, maybe 6. Hard to tell exactly because they were trying to move quietly. Coming from the east. Moving slow but steady. They will be here in maybe 5 minutes. They took defensive positions without discussing it. Sam moved to the front door with his Winchester rifle. Nady went to the back door with her bow and knife. Yuma went upstairs to the small loft with a shotgun and strict instructions to shoot only if someone tried to force entry. The sky was just beginning to lighten when Ezra Crowley's voice rang out across the yard. Sam Brennan, we need to have ourselves a conversation about property rights. Sam stepped onto the porch, rifle held casually but ready. In the growing light, he could count 5 men on horses arranged in a loose semicircle. Crowley in his black vest and white shirt, Bulldog Pike with his sawed-off shotgun, 3 hired guns by the look of them. There's nothing to talk about, Crowley, Sam called back. Turn those horses around and ride back to town. Nobody needs to get hurt today. Now, Sam, let's be reasonable men here, Crowley said, his voice dripping with false friendliness. You paid good money for those Apache women, I'll grant you that. But you're just one old man living alone out here. Can't possibly manage 2 wild females by yourself. We'll take them off your hands. Make this easy. I'll even give you half your money back. $40, that's more than fair. They're not property to be managed or sold, Sam said flatly. They're free women living on this ranch of their own choice. What happens on my land is none of your business. Bulldog Pike laughed. Gravel in a bucket. Free? Apache squaws free? That's rich, old man. Ain't no law says Indians have rights. They're stolen goods. We're taking them back. That's when Nady stepped onto the porch beside Sam. She walked with the controlled grace of a predator, shoulders back and head high, moving like someone walking into battle. She carried no visible weapons, but there was such coiled violence in her posture that all 5 men shifted uneasily. "We belong to no one," she said in clear, cold English. "Not anymore. Not ever again." Yuma appeared beside her a moment later, smaller and trembling, but with a shotgun held steady. "We will not go back," Yuma said, her voice shaking but determined. "We will die first." Bulldog leered at them with undisguised lust. "The big one thinks she's tough. The little one thinks she can shoot. This is going to be fun." He reached for his shotgun. 3 things happened simultaneously. Sam's Winchester came up in one smooth motion, the barrel pointing steadily at Bulldog's chest. Nadie's hand moved faster than thought, and suddenly she held her Apache knife. Yuma raised the shotgun to her shoulder, both hammers cocked with 2 distinct clicks. The barrel aimed at Crowley. "Touch that gun and you die," Sam said, his voice flat and cold and certain. "All of you. Maybe you get us eventually, but the first 3 of you will be dead before you clear leather. I guarantee it." For a long, frozen moment, nobody moved. The hired guns looked at each other, calculating risk versus reward. The answer, visible in their faces, was no. Then Crowley smiled, but it was a snake's smile, cold and venomous. "You can't win this, Sam. We'll come back. With the law or with hired guns? With fire if we have to. You remember fire, don't you? We'll use it to take everything you have left." The threat hit Sam hard, bringing back memories of flames and screams, but he didn't flinch. "Try it," Nadie said, her voice promising violence. "I have killed better men than you. You will just be one more body." Crowley's smile vanished. He jerked his horse around viciously. "This isn't over, Brennan. Not by a long shot." The 5 riders galloped away, throwing up snow and frozen earth. When they were gone, Sam lowered his rifle. His hands were shaking with adrenaline. Nadie lowered her knife, but didn't sheath it. Yuma carefully uncocked the shotgun and sat down abruptly, her legs giving out. For a long moment, none of them spoke. Then Nadie turned to Sam. "Thank you for standing with us." "This is our home," Sam replied, meaning it completely. "All 3 of us. Nobody takes anyone from here against their will. Not while I'm alive." Yuma looked up with tears streaming down her face. "You could have given us to them. Would have been safer." Sam shook his head firmly. "Some things matter more than safe. You too matter. You matter to me." That night they sat by the fire, knowing Crowley would make good on his threat, knowing harder days were coming. But they also knew something more important. They weren't alone anymore. Sam looked at Nadie and Yuma, seeing echoes of daughter and wife, but also seeing them as themselves, unique and precious. And for the first time in 8 years, Samuel Brennan allowed himself to feel something dangerous and wonderful: hope. The belief that maybe the story wasn't over yet, that maybe there were still good chapters left to write. They had become something that looked like family. And for people who'd lost everything, that meant more than safety ever could. That meant everything. The dawn came cold and brutal the morning Crowley returned with his army. Sam had been expecting it, had spent the past week preparing for this moment. But the reality of seeing 10 mounted men spread across the frozen landscape still made his throat tighten with fear. Not for himself, but for the 2 women who'd come to mean more to him than he'd thought possible after 8 years of emotional death. Nadie was already at the window, her warrior instincts having woken her at the first distant sound of hoofbeats. She counted them by sound alone before Sam had even opened his eyes, her acute hearing picking up subtle differences in the rhythm and weight of each horse's gait. 10, she said flatly, her voice showing no fear, only cold tactical assessment. Crowley, Pike, 3 men from before, 5 new ones, all armed. They're spreading out to surround the house. Sam moved to the gun cabinet and began distributing weapons with practiced efficiency. Winchester for himself, loaded with 15 rounds of 44-40 ammunition. The greener shotgun for Nadie, both barrels loaded with double-aught buckshot that would spread a devastating pattern at close range. The lighter shotgun for Yuma, along with a revolver as backup in case things got desperate. "We hold the house," Sam said, his voice calm despite the adrenaline coursing through his veins. "They want us alive for the women, which means they'll try to smoke us out or force surrender. We use that. Make them come to us. Make them pay for every inch." Nadie checked her bow. counting arrows. 12 total, each one tipped with a razor-sharp point she'd spent hours sharpening. Enough to kill 12 men if her aim stayed true, which it always did. She strapped her mother's knife to her belt within easy reach. Yuma was surprisingly calm as she prepared her medical supplies, laying out strips of clean cloth for bandages, the herbs that would stop bleeding and fight infection, her grandmother's bone needle already threaded with sinew for stitching wounds. Her hands were steady as she worked, the healer in her taking over from the frightened woman. The sun was just breaking over the eastern mountains, painting the snow-covered ranch in shades of gold and crimson that reminded Sam uncomfortably of blood and fire, when Crowley's voice rang out across the yard with theatrical authority. "Sam Brennan, you've had a week to think about your situation. I'm offering you one final chance to be reasonable. Send those women out now, and I'll let you live. You can keep your ranch, keep your life, keep your dignity. Refuse and we'll burn you out just like your family burned 8 years ago. Only this time you'll watch them die before you follow." The calculated cruelty of invoking Catherine and Lily's deaths made Sam's finger tighten on the Winchester's trigger, made red rage flash across his vision, but he forced himself to breathe, to think, to be smart rather than emotional. "Those women aren't mine to send anywhere," Sam called back, his voice steady and strong. "They're free people making their own choices. If you want them, you'll have to come through me. And I promise you, Crowley, at least half your men will die in the attempt." Bulldog Pike's voice came next, slurred and eager. "We got 10 men, old-timer. You got what? 1 rifle? 2 women who don't know which end of a gun to hold? We'll roll right over you like a flood over a dry creek bed." That's when Nady appeared at the upstairs window, bow drawn, arrow nocked, and aimed directly at Pike's chest. The distance was maybe 60 yards, well within her effective range. "Apache women know weapons better than white men know cowardice," she called out in clear, ringing English that carried across the frozen morning air. "I put this arrow through your heart before you finish your next breath. Test me." The certainty in her voice, the absolute confidence of someone who'd killed before and would do it again without hesitation, made even Pike shift nervously in his saddle. Yuma appeared at another window with her shotgun, taller and more frightened, but no less determined. "We will not go back to chains. We will die first. We will take as many of you with us as we can." Crowley studied the house, recalculating odds, reading the determination in their voices. He'd expected an easy intimidation, a quick surrender, not genuine willingness to fight to the death. "You're all fools," he said, though his voice held less certainty than before. "But if you want to die for your principles, so be it. Men, prepare to advance. We take the house by force. Try to keep the women alive if possible, but if they die in the fighting, that's acceptable. Brennan doesn't get a third chance." The 10 riders began to move, spreading out to attack from multiple angles, making it harder to defend all approaches simultaneously. 3 toward the front door, 3 toward the back, 2 flanking left, 2 flanking right. Classic military tactics applied to ranch warfare. Sam made a split-second decision. "Nady, take the back with the shotgun. Anyone comes through that door, cut them in half. Yuma, stay upstairs, cover the sides. I'll hold the front." Then he did something unexpected. He stepped out onto the front porch, Winchester held loosely in one hand, the other hand raised in a stopping gesture. "Before you start this fight," he called out loudly, "before good men die for Crowley's greed and wounded pride, you should know something. Captain Marcus Aldridge of the 4th Cavalry is on his way here right now with 12 soldiers. I sent him a letter a week ago detailing everything that's happened, everything Crowley's done. They should arrive within the hour." It was a bluff, a desperate gamble, but Sam sold it with complete conviction. Crowley's face went pale, then flushed with anger. "You're lying. Aldridge wouldn't care about 2 Apache women or a broken-down cowboy." "Maybe not," Sam agreed calmly. "Or maybe he cares about illegal slavery operations in his territory. Maybe he cares about human trafficking across territorial lines. Maybe he cares that you've been bribing Sheriff Thompson and running an unlicensed operation in violation of the Territorial Act of 1882. Maybe he cares that I have documentation of every sale you've made in the past year, including the names of buyers and the prices paid. This last part was actually true. Sam had indeed written to Aldridge, an old army friend, though he had no idea if the letter had arrived or if help was coming. But the detail about documentation was pure fiction, and he watched it land like a physical blow. Three of the hired guns immediately began backing their horses away, calculating that whatever Crowley was paying wasn't worth facing federal cavalry charges. "He's bluffing," Crowley shouted, but uncertainty crept into his voice. "There's no cavalry coming. There's no documentation." "Then call my bluff," Sam said quietly, dangerously. "Attack the house. Maybe you're right and I'm lying. Or maybe in an hour you'll be explaining to Captain Aldridge why you're burning down a ranch and attacking federal witnesses. Your choice." For a long, tense moment, nobody moved. The hired guns looked at each other, at Crowley, at the house where three determined people waited with loaded weapons. Then one of the new men spoke up, a weathered cowboy who looked like he'd seen actual combat. "I didn't sign on for no fight with the cavalry, Crowley. You said this was a simple recovery operation. You didn't mention nothing about federal complications." "There are no federal complications," Crowley insisted, but his voice had gone shrill. "He's lying." "Maybe," the cowboy agreed, "but maybe not, and I ain't risking a noose to find out. I'm gone." He wheeled his horse and rode away without looking back. Two others immediately followed, the fracture spreading through Crowley's force like cracks in river ice. That left Crowley, Pike, and four men who looked increasingly uncertain. 7 against 3, still bad odds, but no longer the overwhelming force they'd been moments before. Pike raised his shotgun towards Sam. "Enough talking. Time for dying." And that's when the bugle sounded in the distance, clear and unmistakable. The cavalry call that Sam had heard 1,000 times during his army years. Every head turned toward the eastern rise, where 12 mounted soldiers in blue uniforms appeared against the morning sky, moving at a steady trot toward the ranch. Sam felt his knees go weak with relief so profound it was almost painful. The letter had gotten through. Aldridge had come. Crowley's face went from red to white to green in rapid succession. "No, no, this isn't possible." Captain Marcus Aldridge rode at the head of the column, a tall man in his late 30s with a cavalry officer's bearing and sharp intelligence in his gray eyes. He surveyed the scene with quick assessment. 10 armed men surrounding a ranch house, 3 people defending from inside. The clear setup of an attack interrupted. "Ezra Crowley," Aldridge commanded, his voice carrying absolute authority. "You're under arrest for human trafficking, bribery of local officials, and operating an illegal indenture operation in violation of federal territorial law." Crowley's hand moved toward his gun, then stopped. Even he wasn't stupid enough to draw on cavalry. "This is a civil matter," he tried, voice desperate. "A simple property dispute. You have no jurisdiction." "I have a letter from Sam Brennan detailing your operation," Aldridge replied calmly. "I have testimony from 3 Apache women you sold in Tucson who confirmed your methods. I have bank records showing payments to Sheriff Thompson, and I have jurisdiction from the territorial governor himself to investigate reports of slavery in Arizona territory. You're done, Crowley." He nodded to his sergeant, who rode forward with manacles. Bulldog Pike made a stupid decision. He swung his shotgun toward Aldridge, perhaps thinking he could grab a hostage or shoot his way out. Nady's arrow took him through the shoulder before he could pull the trigger, punching clean through muscle and pinning his gun arm to his side. He screamed and dropped the shotgun, clutching at the arrow shaft. 4 cavalry carbines immediately leveled at the remaining men. "Anyone else want to try something stupid?" Aldridge asked mildly. The 4 remaining hired guns raised their hands, weapons dropping to the ground. The fight was over before it truly started. As the cavalry moved in to arrest Crowley, Pike, and the others, Sam finally allowed himself to lower his rifle. His hands were shaking, his heart pounding, the adrenaline draining away and leaving him weak and dizzy. Nady and Yuma emerged from the house, moving to stand beside him on the porch. For a moment, the 3 of them just stood there, watching justice finally being done. Aldridge dismounted and walked over, extending his hand to Sam with a genuine smile. "Got your letter 5 days ago. Came as fast as we could. Good to see you're still alive, old friend." Sam gripped his hand, feeling emotion well up that he couldn't quite contain. Marcus, never been happier to see cavalry in my entire life. Aldridge's eyes moved to Nady and Yuma, taking in the shotgun Nady still held, the arrow she'd used to disable Pike, the determination in both their faces. These the women Crowley's been hunting? Nady and Yuma, Sam confirmed. And they're not property, Marcus. They're free women who've chosen to live here of their own will. That needs to be clear. Crystal clear, Aldridge agreed. He turned to the women and spoke directly to them respectfully. Under the territorial law as amended in 1882, Apache individuals can claim citizenship status if sponsored by a territorial resident of good standing. Sam's letter mentioned he wishes to sponsor you both. If you agree, I can file the paperwork today. It'll make you legal citizens under federal protection. Crowley or anyone else tries this again, they'll be attacking federal citizens. Nady and Yuma looked at each other, then at Sam, then back to Aldridge. What does this sponsorship mean? Nady asked carefully. Does it bind us to him? Make us his property under different words? No, Aldridge said firmly. It means Sam vouches for your character and your right to live in the territory. You're free to leave whenever you want, work wherever you choose, own property in your own names. Sam has no legal control over you whatsoever. He's simply saying he trusts you to be good citizens. Nady considered this, her sharp mind working through implications and looking for traps. Finally, she nodded. Then yes, we accept. Excellent, Aldridge said. He pulled papers from his saddlebag. I need your marks here, and Sam's signature as sponsor. These become active immediately. As they completed the paperwork, with Sam signing his careful signature and the women making their marks, Crowley was being loaded onto a horse with his hands manacled behind his back. His face was a mask of fury and hatred. This isn't over, Brennan, he spat. I have friends, lawyers, money. I'll be out in a month, and when I am... You'll be in federal prison in Santa Fe for 5 to 10 years, Aldridge interrupted pleasantly. Judge Blackwood doesn't take kindly to slavery operations, tends to give maximum sentences. And by the time you get out, Sam and these ladies will be well-established citizens with full legal protection. Touch them again and you'll hang. The territorial law is changing, Crowley. You just didn't change with it. The cavalry prepared to leave with their prisoners. Aldridge paused beside his horse to speak privately with Sam. You all right out here? Truly? He asked quietly. That letter of yours, it was the first time you've reached out to anyone in 8 years. Made me wonder if you were finally starting to heal. Sam looked at Nady and Yuma, who were watching the cavalry prepare to depart. Maybe I am, Marcus. Maybe I finally found a reason to try living again instead of just surviving. Good, Aldridge said warmly. Catherine and Lily wouldn't want you to stay dead inside forever. They'd want you to find happiness again, even if it looks different than what you had before. He swung into his saddle. I'll be back in a month to check on you. Make sure you're all doing all right. He lowered his voice. And Sam, those two women look at you the same way you look at them. Whatever family you're building here, it's real. Don't sabotage it with guilt over the past. The past is done. This is your chance at a future. The cavalry rode out with their prisoners, leaving the ranch in profound silence. For a long moment, the three of them just stood there processing everything that had happened. Then Yuma began to laugh, a sound of pure relief and joy that started small and grew larger. Nady joined in, the tension releasing in waves of genuine mirth. Even Sam found himself laughing, the sound rusty and unfamiliar but real. They were safe. They were legal citizens. They were free. The next 2 weeks passed in a haze of recovery and cautious celebration. The constant tension that had lived in all of them since Crowley's first visit finally eased, allowing them to breathe properly for the first time. The winter slowly began to release its grip on the land. Temperatures rose from brutal to merely cold. The snow started to melt in earnest, revealing brown grass underneath and the first hints of green in sheltered spots. Icicles dripped from the eaves in musical patterns. Birds began to return, their songs filling the silence that had reigned for months. Sam's shoulder, wounded during the confrontation when a splinter from the porch railing had torn a gash, healed slowly under Yuma's careful treatment. She cleaned it daily with herb-infused water that stung but prevented infection, applied poultices that drew out inflammation, stitched it closed with tiny, precise stitches that would leave only a small scar. Nadi threw herself into preparing the ranch for spring with the focused intensity of someone who finally believed in a future worth working toward. She repaired the eastern awning that had partially collapsed under snow weight, rebuilding it larger and stronger than before. She cleared the irrigation ditches that fed the garden, ensuring water would flow properly when the mountain snowpack melted. She mended every section of fence on the property, replacing rotten posts and broken rails with new wood cut from the forest. Yuma began her garden in earnest as the ground thawed enough to work. She planned it with the precision of an engineer and the intuition of someone who understood plants on a deep, almost spiritual level. Root vegetables in the north section, where they'd stay cool, onions, carrots, potatoes, turnips, leafy greens in the east for morning sun, lettuce, spinach, chard, medicinal herbs throughout, sage, yarrow, echinacea, St. John's wort. And in the very center, a small plot of sacred Apache plants she'd managed to gather from the wild. Tobacco for prayers, yucca for many uses, devil's claw for baskets. One evening in early April, as they finished the day's work and sat down to supper, Sam looked at the two women who transformed his dead house into a living home and felt words rising that needed to be spoken. "I need to say something," he began, his voice rough with emotion he was trying hard to control. "These past months with you both, they've been the closest thing to happy I've felt since Catherine and Lily died. You've given me reasons to wake up in the morning beyond just habit. You've made this house feel like a home again instead of a tomb." He paused, gathering courage. When spring fully comes, when the pass is clear and travel gets easy, if either of you wants to head out to find your people or start fresh somewhere else, I'll help you go. I'll give you money, horses, supplies, whatever you need. You don't owe me anything for what I did in Copper Springs. That was just human decency, nothing that creates debt. Nady and Yuma looked at each other, one of those wordless conversations passing between them. "Go where?" Nady asked quietly. "Our people are scattered across reservations, dying of white man's diseases and broken spirits. Our village is ashes. Our family is dead or lost. What we've built here with you, this is more of a home than anything we could find searching for a past that no longer exists." Yuma reached across the table and took Sam's weathered hand in both of hers, small and gentle. "You saved our lives. You gave us freedom. You treated us like human beings when the world saw us as less than animals. You stood between us and our enemies even though it would have been easier and safer to hand us over. This ranch, this life, this is our home now, our family. If you'll have us." Sam felt tears burning in his eyes, the first genuine tears of happiness rather than grief that he'd shed in 8 years. "If I'll have you, God, yes. Nothing would make me happier than having you both stay forever. I just didn't want to trap you with obligation or gratitude. Wanted you to choose freely." "We choose this," Nady said firmly. "We choose you. We choose the family we're building together." That night marked a turning point, the moment when they stopped being three survivors sharing space and truly became a family bound by choice rather than circumstance. 2 weeks later, on a warm afternoon when the April sun finally held genuine heat, something happened that would change everything once more. They were working together to complete the new awning, the last major repair needed before spring planting consumed all their time. Sam held boards in place while Nady hammered massive nails through the heavy timber. Yuma mixed adobe mud to seal gaps and provide additional weather protection. As Nady drove the final nail and stepped back to admire their work, she jumped down from the 12-foot-high structure with the casual grace of someone who'd been climbing since childhood. She landed lightly beside Sam, close enough that he could smell the clean scent of her sweat and the sage soap Yuma made. She looked at him for a long moment, something shifting in her dark eyes, some decision being made in real time. "This house belongs to all three of us now," she said quietly, but with absolute conviction. Then she did something Sam never expected. She reached up, placed her hand behind his neck, and kissed him. Not a gentle kiss of gratitude or sisterly affection, but a real kiss, deep and passionate and unmistakable in its intent. Sam froze for a moment, shocked, his mind struggling to process what was happening. Then something inside him that had been frozen for 8 years suddenly thawed, and he found himself kissing her back, his arms coming up to hold her close, feeling alive in a way he'd forgotten was possible. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Nady didn't step back or look away. She held his gaze with warrior's directness. "I don't kiss from gratitude," she said clearly. "I don't kiss because I owe you or because I'm confused or because I'm trying to secure my place here. I kiss because I love you. Because over these months, I've come to love the man you are, not the man who saved me. Because I want to be more than your housekeeper or your friend. I want to be your wife." Before Sam could respond, before he could even begin to process this declaration, Yuma stepped forward. Her face was flushed, whether from work or emotion or both, but her eyes were clear and determined. She kissed Sam's other cheek, gentle where Nady had been passionate, but no less meaningful. "That kiss is mine," she said softly. "I love you too. Not as a father, though you've been more of a father than any man I've known. I love you as the man I choose, the man I want to build a life with." She glanced at Nady, and again that wordless communication passed between them. "In Apache culture," Yuma continued, "a good man can have multiple wives if all women agree and choose freely. It's not common, but it's not forbidden. We've discussed this, Nady and I. We both want to stay. We both love you. We're both asking to be your wives, both of us, together." Sam felt like the ground had shifted beneath his feet, like the world had suddenly turned upside down, and everything he thought he understood about his life had just been rewritten. "But society won't accept this," he said weakly, his mind racing. "The law won't recognize it. People will talk. You'll both be judged harshly. I'm too old, too broken. I've got nothing to offer you except this failing ranch and a broken heart that's barely started healing." Nady cupped his face in her strong hands, forcing him to meet her eyes. "White people took our land, killed our families, destroyed our villages, sold us like cattle. We don't care what white society thinks or what their laws recognize. Here on this land, we make our own laws, the law of love and freedom and choice." "You're not too old," Yuma added gently. "You're exactly who we want, and you're not broken beyond repair. We've watched you heal over these months, watched you remember how to smile and laugh and hope. We've been healing too, all three of us together. Maybe that's what love is. People who are broken helping each other become whole again." Sam looked between them, these two remarkable women who'd come into his life in the worst possible way and somehow become the best thing that had ever happened to him besides Catherine and Lily. "I love both of you," he admitted, the words feeling like they'd been locked inside him for weeks and only now finding release. "I kept telling myself I shouldn't, that it was wrong to feel this way about two women, that I was betraying Catherine's memory. But I do. I love you both, differently but equally. Nady, you're fierce and strong, and you make me want to be braver. Yuma, you're gentle and wise, and you make me want to be better. Together, you've saved me as much as I ever saved you." "Then stop fighting it," Nady said simply. "Stop thinking about society or propriety or what people who don't know us might think. We three are the only people who matter in this decision. Do you want us as your wives?" Sam thought about the lonely years ahead if they ever left. He thought about growing old alone in this house again, the silence and emptiness returning to claim him. He thought about dying without ever again knowing the warmth of love and partnership. Then he thought about waking up every day to these two women, building a life together, maybe even having children, giving Nady and Yuma the family they'd lost, giving himself another chance at fatherhood. "Yes," he said, his voice strengthening with certainty. "Yes, I want that more than anything. I want you both as my wives, if you'll have me despite all my flaws and fears and the ghosts I still carry." They came together then, all three of them, in an embrace that felt like coming home after a long journey through darkness. 3 weeks later, on a warm May evening, when wildflowers covered the meadow in a carpet of purple and gold, they held a ceremony of their own making. Father Miguel Santos came from the mission, one of the few white men they trusted enough to invite. Captain Aldridge rode down from the fort with genuine warmth and approval. Chen Wei closed his store for the day and made the 18-mile journey. Mrs. Henderson, the seamstress who'd been the first woman in Copper Springs to befriend them, came with her husband. The ceremony was a blend of cultures and traditions. Father Santos offered a Catholic blessing, understanding that while he couldn't officially marry them under church law, he could ask God's grace on their union. Nadi and Yuma performed an Apache commitment ceremony, ancient words spoken in their mother tongue, as Yuma sprinkled sacred pollen on all three of them, and Nadi tied leather cords around their wrists to symbolize their bond. Sam spoke vows he'd written himself, his voice rough with emotion. I promise to protect you until my last breath, to respect your culture and your choices, to love you as I loved Catherine and Lily, not to replace them, but to expand my heart to hold all of you, to build a life worthy of the gift you've given me. There was no legal marriage certificate, no official recognition from the territorial government, but standing in that meadow under the spring sun, with a handful of friends who accepted them watching with genuine happiness, the three of them became a family in the ways that mattered most. That night, in the house that had been dead for 8 years and was now vibrantly alive, they consummated their union. It was awkward at times, three people learning to navigate intimacy together, but it was also beautiful and meaningful and exactly right. 1 year later, in the spring of 1884, the transformation of Broken Creek Ranch was complete. The house had been expanded with a new room built onto the back. The garden flourished under Yuma's expert care, producing more food than three people could eat. The surplus sold or traded in town. The cattle herd had grown from 18 to 35 through careful management. Chickens pecked in a new coop, providing eggs and meat. 2 pigs rooted in their pen, being fattened for autumn slaughter. Sam, now 46, had more gray in his hair, but brightness had returned to his eyes. The constant pain in his back had eased thanks to Yuma's treatments. He laughed frequently, a sound that had been absent from the ranch for so long. Its return felt like a minor miracle. Nady, 28, had softened in subtle ways while maintaining her core strength. Her hair, always kept long in Apache tradition, now frequently held wildflowers that Yuma wove into the braids. She still practiced combat skills at dawn, still could split wood better than any man, but she also sang while she worked and smiled freely. And Nady was 8 months pregnant, her belly round and full with the child growing inside her. Yuma, 23, had grown confident and self-assured. The fear that had lived in her eyes for so long had been replaced by quiet contentment. She'd given birth 3 months earlier to a healthy son they'd named Owen in English and Bidzil, meaning strong in Apache. The afternoon sun was warm as they all sat on the newly expanded porch. Yuma nursed Owen, humming an Apache lullaby. Nady leaned against Sam's shoulder, his hand resting gently on her swollen belly, where their child moved and kicked. The ranch spread out before them, green and alive and thriving. 1 year ago, Sam said quietly, wonder in his voice, had spent the past week preparing 1 year ago. Nady replied, we were slaves, property, less than human in the eyes of the law. Now we're free women, mothers, wives to a good man, owners of this land we've poured our sweat and love into. Yuma looked down at Owen, who'd fallen asleep at her breast, his tiny face peaceful. 1 year from now, we'll be a family of 5, 6, if Sam's hoping for twins. Sam laughed. Lord help me if it's twins. I'm not sure I can handle that much chaos. You'll handle it, Nady said confidently. You're stronger than you think, braver than you believe. You're the man who stood alone against 10 armed men to protect us. Fatherhood will be easy in comparison. My child will have an Apache name, Nady continued, her hand covering Sam's on her belly. Kai, if it's a girl, it means willow. And an English name, Yuma added softly, tears suddenly in her eyes. We've talked about this. If it's a girl, we want to name her Rose, after your daughter. So in a way, she'll live again. Sam couldn't speak for a long moment, emotion closing his throat completely. When he finally found his voice, it was thick with tears. Catherine, Lily, if you can hear me somehow, if there's anything beyond this life, I want you to know I haven't forgotten you. I never will. But I've learned that hearts don't hold just one love. Hearts can expand. They can make room for new people without erasing the old ones. He pulled both women close, all 3 of them, 4 counting baby Owen. I thought I died 8 years ago in that fire, but I was just waiting, waiting for two Apache women to teach me how to live again. On a distant hill, barely visible in the golden afternoon light, stood two simple grave markers side by side, Catherine and Lily Brennan, forever in our hearts. And beside those graves, wildflowers grew thick and lush because Yuma planted them there every week, tending them with the same care she gave her garden, ensuring that Sam's first family was never forgotten, even as his new family grew and flourished. The future stretched ahead of them now, uncertain in its details but certain in one crucial way. They would face it together. Three people who'd been broken had found wholeness in each other. Three survivors had built something more precious than mere survival. They'd built a life worth living. As the sun set behind the mountains, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson, baby Owen woke and began to cry, hungry again. Yuma lifted him to nurse, smiling at his impatience. Nady felt the baby in her belly kick hard, responding to Owen's cries or perhaps just asserting its own existence. "This one's going to be strong," she said with satisfaction. "I can feel it, a warrior spirit." "Or just impatient like someone else I know," Sam teased, earning him an elbow in the ribs that was gentle despite Nady's strength. Inside the house, supper needed cooking. The cattle needed final checking. 100 small tasks demanded attention before the day could end. But for this moment, this perfect moment, they simply sat together on the porch of Broken Creek Ranch. A cowboy who'd learned to hope again, two Apache women who'd reclaimed their freedom and dignity, a baby who represented the future they were building, and a child still waiting to be born, waiting to enter a world that was harsh and often cruel, but could also, with luck and love and determination, be transformed into something beautiful. The old Sam Brennan, the ghost who drifted through the world for 8 empty years, was truly gone now. In his place stood a man who'd learned that love didn't come with limits or rules, that family could be built from the most unlikely materials, and that second chances, when they came, should be grabbed with both hands and held tight. As darkness fell and stars began to appear in the vast Arizona sky, Sam looked at his wives, at his son, at the life they'd built together against all odds, and despite a world that said what they were doing was wrong or impossible or shouldn't be allowed. "Thank you," he said simply, speaking to all of them, to the children, to the memory of Catherine and Lily, to whatever force in the universe had brought these people together. "Thank you for saving me. Thank you for teaching me that the story doesn't end just because tragedy strikes. Thank you for showing me that there can be new chapters, good chapters, beautiful chapters, still waiting to be written." "We're the ones who should be thanking you," Yuma said softly. "No," Nady corrected, her voice firm but warm. "We saved each other. That's what family does. That's what love does. We pulled each other out of the darkness and into the light, all three of us together. That's not something to thank each other for. It's just what we do. It's who we are now." And she was right. They were who they'd become together. Stronger, braver, more whole than any of them had been alone. The winter trials had ended. Spring had come, bringing rebirth and renewal. And ahead lay summer's warmth, autumn's harvest, and many, many years of life lived fully and love given freely. The story that had begun with chains and suffering had become something else entirely. A story of freedom and family and the stubborn, resilient human capacity to heal even the deepest wounds when given time and love and reason enough to treat them. As they finally rose to go inside, to cook supper and tend the baby and do all the ordinary things that filled their extraordinary life, Sam took one last look at the ranch spread out before him in the gathering darkness. Broken Creek Ranch, once a place of death and loneliness, now a place of life and love. Once a tomb, now a home. Once the end of his story, now the beginning of something better than he'd ever dared to dream. And that, Sam thought as he followed his wives inside to the warmth and light and laughter that waited, was more than enough. That was everything. The old man's voice faded into silence. The afternoon sun had moved across the sky, painting long shadows across the porch of Broken Creek Ranch. Jacob sat perfectly still, eyes wide, processing everything he'd heard. "Grandpa," the boy said finally, his voice small, "where are Grandma Nady and Grandma Yuma now?" Sam's weathered face broke into a smile, the kind that held 40 years of love and memory. "Inside, boy," cooking supper, same as they have every night for 40 years. Go on, call them out here. Jacob ran to the door and called inside. Grandma Nady, Grandma Yuma, Grandpa wants you. Two women emerged from the house, moving with the careful grace of age, but still strong in spirit. Nady at 67 was still tall and proud, her long hair now silver white, pulled back in traditional Apache braids. Deep lines marked her face, maps of a life well lived, but her eyes still held that fierce light, that warrior spirit that had never been broken. She walked with a slight limp from old wounds, but her shoulders remained straight. Yuma at 62 was smaller and rounder, her once black hair streaked with gray, her gentle face creased with smile lines from 4 decades of laughter and love. She still moved with the healer's grace, still carried herself with quiet confidence. They came to stand beside Sam's rocking chair, one on each side, the three of them together as they had been for 40 years. Sam reached up and took their hands, his weathered fingers intertwining with theirs. Jacob looked at his grandmothers with new eyes, seeing them not just as the women who'd raised his father and cooked him meals and told him stories, but as the brave souls who'd survived slavery and found freedom, who'd built this ranch with their own hands, who'd dared to love when the world said they shouldn't. You were very brave, grandmas, Jacob said softly. Nady smiled, a rare full smile that transformed her stern face. We did what we had to do, little one. We survived. We fought. We loved. And we built this, Yuma added, gesturing to the ranch spread out before them, the land they'd poured 4 decades of sweat and love into. Sam looked at his wives, these two women who'd saved him from a darkness deeper than any grave, who'd taught him that hearts could heal and love could grow even from ashes and despair. 40 years together, and he loved them more now than he had at the beginning. Jacob, Sam said, his voice quiet but firm, carrying the weight of all he'd learned. Remember this story. Remember that the worst moments of your life don't have to define you. Remember that love comes in many forms, and family is what you build, not just what you're born with. Remember that doing the right thing is often the hardest thing, but it's always worth it. He squeezed his wife's hands gently. Your grandmas taught me that broken people can heal each other, that darkness can be turned to light, that loss doesn't have to mean the end of everything. They taught me how to live again when I'd forgotten what living meant. The three of them stood together on the porch as the sun set behind the mountains, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson. 3 people who'd survived the worst and built something beautiful from the ruins. 3 souls bound together by choice and love and 40 years of shared life. That's how you turn darkness into light, Jacob, Sam said softly. That's how you survive and build something worth leaving behind. You love. You fight for what matters. You never give up on the possibility of happiness, even when it seems impossible. Jacob nodded, understanding settling into his young heart. He would remember this story. He would carry it forward. And somewhere Sam knew Catherine and Lily were smiling, glad that he'd found his way back to the light, glad that he'd learned to love again, glad that their memory lived on not in grief, but in gratitude for what they'd shared. The sun dipped below the horizon. The stars began to appear. And on the porch of Broken Creek Ranch, 3 people who'd found each other in the darkest times stood together. Proof that love could conquer even the deepest pain. That was the story. That was the truth. That was everything.